In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how World War II started and the U.S. got involved. We have to talk about the rise of several dictators in Europe prior to World War II. The first one at the top, Joseph Stalin, was the communist totalitarian dictator of the Soviet Union. Remember, the Russians had bailed out of World War I, signing a quick peace agreement with Germany because of the internal Russian Revolution, which brought the communists to power, the Bolsheviks, and then initially turned communists, led by Vladimir Lenin, and then, upon Lenin's death, Joseph Stalin. But the real story are the two dictators in the picture at the bottom. Benito Mussolini is on the left. He comes to power in Italy in 1929, and Adolf Hitler is the Nazi dictator in Germany on the right, and he's going to become Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Both of these men take power with popular support at a time of tremendous political and economic instability in their countries. Hitler initially idolizes Mussolini, but ultimately it's going to be Mussolini that follows Hitler into World War II, and ultimately Mussolini's own demise. By 1938, Hitler had built up Germany's military power to advance his own master plan. We can see that in 1936 he had remilitarized the Rhineland region, but it's in 1938 where he's going to capture the attention of other countries and annex, Austria, and this area of Czechoslovakia known as the Sudetenland, which had a large German population in it. These actions are going to capture the attention of Britain and France. And you can see here we've got Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain on the left, and next to him is Edward Daladier, the head of France, and they go to Munich to meet with Hitler about Germany's intentions. Hitler assures these men that he's not interested in taking any more territory, but intends to keep what he's already taken. And the two gentlemen basically allow him to do just that. Here we see Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, upon returning from the Munich conference, this so you can see the quote where he's telling the British people that he has brought peace with honor and basically not to worry. What both gentlemen did, though, is a policy known as appeasement, which is giving in to aggression in order to avoid war. Hitler figured out rather quickly neither of these two men were interested in giving him a fight, so Hitler was happy to play into that and tell them that he was not interested in conquering any more territory, thus allowing to keep what he had already conquered. But in fact, you cannot appease a dictator. Appeasing dictators does not work. Excuse me. So within about a year, just about a year, we can see here that Germany headed east and invaded Poland. Also notice on this map, Stalin sent the Soviet army into Poland heading west because Stalin was concerned that Hitler would simply send his army through Poland, send the tanks through Poland and on into the Soviet Union. So the two dictators themselves actually signed an agreement whereby they agreed not to invade each other. I should say Hitler essentially agreed that he was not going to move into the Soviet Union. Britain couldn't allow this to stand. Britain and Poland had a relationship, so Britain and France now are going to declare war on Germany. And it is the invasion of Poland, Germany's invasion of Poland in September of 1939, that is the official start of World War II. With Britain and France's declaration of war, we can see from this map that Germany simply moves its military, or a chunk of its military, west and captures and occupies the northern two-thirds of France for the duration of World War II. Where's the United States? about the same place it was in World War I, neutral, at least at the start of the war. Congress managed to tie President Franklin Roosevelt's hands with the Neutrality Acts in the early 1930s. So the president was not in a position to be able to help Britain and France. And in this situation, other than like World War I, while we were officially neutral, we clearly sympathized with Britain and France right from the beginning. And the only policy that existed at the time was known as cash and carry. I'll make this a little bit larger so you can see it. Essentially, Great Britain could come with her ships to our shores, purchase goods, tools, what have you, non-military goods, for cash, and carry it back to Great Britain in her ships. And that was U.S. policy for the better part of a couple of years. Ultimately, most of the gold supply of Great Britain ended up in the United States because Great Britain essentially went broke through this policy, and the Prime Minister, who was no longer Neville Chamberlain, it was Winston Churchill, was constantly pressuring Roosevelt to change this policy. Of course, this was going to take another action on Congress's part, but Roosevelt did take the case to the American people, as this quote shows, right into their living rooms on the radio, encouraging Congress basically to change its position, which it would finally do in November of 1941. By passing the Lend-Lease Act, the United States was now able to provide war materials to any country it deemed vital to our national security, which of course meant Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Note the date, November 1941, and now these countries need massive supplies of weapons. So the Great Depression was still existed here in the United States. We had high unemployment, north of about 10% or so. But with the passage of this law, those factories were going to reopen and people would be put to work, and essentially the Depression is going to come to a fairly swift end. We'll see why, because a month from this date, something else is going to happen. But let's take a moment and turn our attention to the other side of the world. Japan, of course, had been watching what was going on in Europe and was actually, I suppose, rather pleased, because much of the area on this map were British and French colonies, which Britain and France were not in a position to defend. So Japan now moves in and begins to take territory over. Here's Japan in green in the area I'm moving, the island chain that I'm going up and down here. They moved into Korea in 1905 and had occupied Korea for quite some time. Moving into Manchuria gives them a supply of iron for steel for their economy. They will move in and occupy China and areas in Southeast Asia, which include oil supplies, also very important for modern industrial economy. We are aware of what Japan is doing, but before we get to that point, I should probably say that you see here Japan creates an alliance known as the Axis powers. The tripartite pact is signed, where Germany, Japan, and Italy create an alliance. Remember, Germany and Italy were already fighting in Europe. Japan was not about to assist in any of that. So this worked to Japan's benefit because it kept Britain and France tied up, kept Germany and Italy, Germany in particular, friendly with Japan. And we were protesting. The United States was protesting with words, a few actions, nothing military, just a refusal to finally sell Japan oil, which it needed desperately because Japan doesn't have any supplies of oil underneath Japan itself. It has to import all of its oil, some of which it had been doing from the United States. Japan recognized that we, the U.S., was in the position, excuse me, the only one in the position of stopping them. So they launch a surprise attack on our Navy in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, December 7th, 1941. You can see the pictures here. Let's go closer to the map. We see Pearl Harbor, the southern end of Oahu, along with several air bases. And Japan actually makes uh, two separate strikes approximately an hour apart from each other, and does the damage that you see here in the pictures, essentially taking the United States, destroying most of its Pacific fleet so that we can't even get into the fight. Remember, this is a preemptive strike on Japan's part, so that we don't get involved, and they did an excellent job in the short term of preventing us from getting involved. The very next day, President Franklin Roosevelt asked Congress for a declaration of war, and we are into the war. And nobody is happier than Winston Churchill at the fact that we are in. Because Churchill understood now that the full force of America and its military power would now be used, and would be used initially in Germany. So let's sum up. The dictators had come to power in the Soviet Union, but the key concern for us are Mussolini in Italy and Hitler, of course, in Germany. All right. As Germany started to annex Austria and the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, Britain and France tried to appease him, let him keep what he had already taken in exchange for a pledge not to take any more territory. That clearly didn't work. Germany, about a year later, invades Poland, and that is the official start of World War II. The United States policy at the time was neutrality. However, we did have the cash and carry policy that Roosevelt developed, and then ultimately the Lend-Lease Act, where we finally could loan the Allies military weapons. All right, Japan on December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, according to President Roosevelt, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, trying to take us out of the fight even before we come in, but that will bring the United States into the war. In future lessons in this unit, we're going to take a look at the development of World War II.